welcome to another video. And since the Rover 400 is the only car that remains in the fleet, since I stopped doing videos for a while, I figured it made sense to actually do a recap of what has happened to it since 2020 or 2021. That car back then had something like 135,000 kilometers on the clock. It's now over 170,000, so quite a lot has happened, of course, and I just figured that it would make sense to go through it. So, shall we start? We're going to start at the front, and as you can see, there's something here that this car didn't have before, which is the fog lamps. And fitting them was, well, not exactly very difficult, but there were a couple parts missing. Obviously, we didn't have these masks, we didn't have the fog lights themselves. We did have part of the pre-installation with the cable that came from the interior to here. We needed the relays. I saved the relays from the 400 that was my dad's. I replaced the relays which are behind the center console, and I also had to find a switch which had the two buttons for the front and rear fog lights, because the other one only had a button for the rear ones, obviously. Then it was a matter of wiring it up. I think what was missing in terms of wiring was basically the wiring that goes from the button to the relays and from the relays to here. I'm not entirely sure, it's been a while now, but yeah, if you want to know more about that and you want to do this in your car, I can try and find it, but it's really not that difficult actually. Come to the side, we already had these chrome wing mirrors. These are not actually the same, because the ones I bought were for a UK car. Although you have a way of setting it to right-hand drive or left-hand drive, the truth is it's not that easy. I haven't been able to do that, my mechanic hasn't been able to do that, so I decided I would just replace them and keep the other ones for parts. I mean, the motor is still good. And at the time I was a bit of a dummy, I still am, and I stripped the plug completely, so I just had the terminals connecting to the plug in the car, and now everything is as it should. The only issue with these wing mirrors, which I think I talked about back then, is that these are for the 45, and the wiring is slightly different. So when you try to move them up or down, they do inverse motion. But even then, at the time, they were only going up when I pressed down, and they were not going down at all. So what I had to do, let me not show much of the interior, was actually replace the button. Another big improvement in this car were the door handles, chrome ones. They are not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. I only replaced them because, to be fair, I only wanted to find ones and put them in the car when I would do the full respray, but the door handle on the driver's side cracked, which is common, and even more common in these actually, so I just decided to do that. They were not very expensive, I think it was 60 euros the four of them, something like that. One thing that you might consider, I might consider doing in the future, is saving just the handle, which is actually better quality than the original plastic one, but using the surrounds that are original for the car and just have them painted. There's a bit of a dent there, but the big one is this one, which happened in 2021, I think, and it was actually my girlfriend's fault. Sorry about that. She basically hit a pole in a parking lot, and it's not looking very pretty. I might replace the door in the meantime. I might just wait a little bit longer, and when the car goes for a respray, we take care of that. We're gonna see. The headlights have been polished again 2 years ago. They're holding relatively well, although they are not perfect. To be honest, I haven't waxed them or put any sort of protection, so that's probably to be expected. But still, they are looking good enough. No news at the back yet, but I did buy a rear spoiler, one that doesn't have the third stoplight, because I didn't want that. Of course, lacquer peel is getting worse, as you can see. But given how it was already when I bought it, I can say it's getting much worse, or at least not too quickly. And yeah, overall, oh yes, that's looking terrible. that's actually not difficult to fix, or I could just buy another one and save me some time. It's not going to be perfect, but maybe it's going to be a better base to work on than this. Shall I show you inside now? Because that's where things are a bit different. So if we start at the door, I've decided to upholster these little cubbies. It looks better and it doesn't rattle if you decide to store things in there. And now we also have the dimmer button, which is not plugged to anything. It's just because I hate plugging plugs, and there's still one there for the cruise control, which I don't know I'll ever use. In the future I might use it for something interesting, which is to dim the interior ambient light. And now you ask me, but this car has no ambient light. And that's one of the things that I've done in the meantime, which was adding lights to these buttons over here. It annoyed me that they didn't have any lights, and I don't think I'm going to be able to show you. Well, you can see that there's some light in there, but the effect is obviously much better at night. I also added some light to the rear view mirror, which is not the same as the original. This is a rear view mirror from an MGTF. This was a common mod in MG Rover circles, and I've ended up doing exactly the same. And I fitted the lights there with those cute masks around. And if you want more light, you can just, do that. While we are talking about lights, I've also found a new interior light dome. This came from an Honda Accord from '99, I think. It was an exclusive, executive, I think it was executive. And now we do have separate lights for each side, plus the other light in the middle. Oh dear, that noise. They always thought that cars like the Alfa 146 did better in this regard. So, very happy with that. It was not easy. It cost me around 40 euros, which was not cheap, but yeah. Of course, this car doesn't have a sunroof, but there are versions of this dome which have a map reading light in here, and I'm going to replace that in the future. And I also need to find a way of covering those wires and replace this end liner one day. More changes in the interior. This was broken, it was already cracked, and I tried to remove it once. It's likely that it will break, especially if you live in a sunny place like Portugal. And yeah, I managed to find this one. They were able to remove it from the car without breaking, and I have been able to install it without breaking. We have a different radio now. This is a Kenwood KMM BT204, of course that tells you a lot. Yeah, that's pretty good, that. But the main point is that it's a Bluetooth radio, which of course helps a lot. I just get in the car and it connects automatically. I can also get calls on the car and reply. I just had the wire go behind the dash and come here behind the pillar. All fine and dandy. That's also been upholstered with the same material that I found, which is a sort of carpet with adhesive. It's really easy to use. For a long time I've been trying to find a leather gear knob, but the ones I saw for sale, not a lot of them. People were asking around 120, 130 euros, and I didn't want to pay that. And at some point I found this gear knob, which is actually for the first Rover 400s until 98, because it's sort of round in shape, not squared. But it's a wooden gear knob. The guy was asking 65 euros for it, and it was new, and I didn't think twice. When it got to me, I realized two things. One, the wooden part was separated from the metal part that screws in there. And the other thing is that the original gaiter for this car had a different design and had two clips to help put it in place. So I had to find a different gaiter, which is this one. The original one has some sort of stitching over here from the outside, and this one is different, and this is circular, you know. These are known for dropping, and I will need to put a bit of tape over there in order for it to grip better. But overall, very happy with that too. Can you see that? How is that hanging from there? Yes. Out you go, friend. As I was saying, I took a gamble on the wooden steering wheel, and unfortunately it was not wood, so I could not take care of the damage that there was. I tried to find a guy that did aqua printing, but the guy didn't get back to me again, and I didn't think about that again. But I need to, because this leather steering wheel is getting a bit worse, you know. It's not looking great, I've seen worse, but I don't like that. Here in the back, the only change is that now you don't have a big lump in here because the structure for the seat was sort of broken. This one is good. The seat itself is not new over there. I have another one and I'm planning on sending this to a upholster so that he can make a brand new one from 2 seats. Let's see if that works out or not. Now, we already had the rear headrests and the right guides. What we didn't have was this original curtain for this car, which is lovely in the summer, and it also gives you some privacy. The only issue with it is that the supports are not OEM. I just found something that could work and never bothered with finding the right ones. And once I was trying to get the curtain off in a hurry, and yeah, you know, that happened. That's not new anymore, but it's still there. I was really sad when I did that. It's just difficult to strike the right balance in, well, going around with your life and trying to keep things perfect. And this will never be perfect in general. And the curtain is not perfect at all. Something else that is annoying about that, actually, now just to prove me wrong, it retracted, but sometimes you open the boot and it's still there hanging. Fine, keep your secrets. I've also had to replace the rear parcel shelf. This cost me 50 euros and it's not easy to find a good one. And the curtain cost another 50, if I'm not wrong. Expensive times. Some maintenance has been done too, or shall I say repairing breakdowns, because this needed a new alternator, and as you can see this is already oily, and that was the reason why the other one died. You'll see in a minute why I'm not fixing that issue and just praying that the alternator hangs in there for a bit longer. Another thing that we replaced, but you can see it from here, was the AC. At some point we stopped having cold air inside, so I needed to replace that and also recharge the system. That cost me around 250 euros, the two things, which I think is average. More recently, in December, the car needed a new starter motor because the one in there, can you have a look at it? Yes, we can. The one in there broke. No, really, it literally broke the casing. The car started having issues starting, and at the 4th or 5th attempt, another day, it broke the casing. You can see there's a new engine mount in here, and the engine mount for the gearbox has also been replaced. I mean, the central engine mount, because this one over here hasn't. It seems to be decent. The clutch has been replaced like 10,000 kilometers ago, and my R65 gearbox was noisy, so I replaced it too with the one for the 1.6. The R65 gearbox in the 1.6 engine has a slightly taller ratio, so instead of doing 3,600 RPM at 120 kilometers an hour, I now do 3,450 RPM. It doesn't seem like a lot, but everything helps. Unfortunately, I think that this gearbox is not perfect too. I think that the usual culprit, which is the input shaft, this dipstick is sort of broken, but it still works, so we haven't replaced it yet. We also have a new sump because the thread on the old one didn't want to work anymore, so it developed an oil leak right after I serviced it. That was not there on the exhaust. This car is a bit low at the front, the suspension is on the soft side, so doing that is not difficult. This is missing. That happened recently. I've replaced the tires in 2021, so 3 years ago. These are the ones that were at the back, so they are still relatively good. These ones, I don't know, because my spirited driving is killing them in here, on the side. I usually only fill them to 2.2 or 2.3 bars. Over that it gets a bit harsh. I know that would help with the wear on the tires on the side, but yeah, I'd rather replace them a bit more frequently than dealing with the harsh ride. One of the reasons why I don't have a ZS and I have this is that because it's so comfortable. So I really have to find the right balance. Brake pads and discs, solid discs, have been replaced in 2021 too. I actually found ventilated ones, but they didn't work in here. I think they were for a Rover 216, one of the earlier ones, and it's not compatible. I think that the system for a light on the Civic MB from 98, 99, 2000 could work in here. I'm going to confirm that, and I'm going to try and replace it now, because the shudder when you try to brake from high speeds is horrible. It developed that like 1 year ago, and it's getting worse. And it's not the first of these cars to do that. Some people say it has to do with the wheel hub too, and that's also an issue on the Civics. I've also replaced the back box in early 2022, I think in January, because the other one was, rotten. I don't think it had opened a big hole yet, but it was not looking very good. This is a bit better, and it cost me around 100 euros, 110. Yeah, I don't know if these are the shocks that I've replaced earlier or if it was the front ones, but there's only 1 year and 10,000 kilometer gap between them, and this was probably like 30,000 kilometers ago, so they are still pretty good. They are Bilstein, if I'm not mistaken, and they are supposed to be a direct replacement to the OEM ones. Now, I've needed to record this again because wind noise was unbearable, but let's talk about the elephant in the room, which is the engine. In December last year, it started taking a little longer to start in the morning. It would hesitate and then fire into life, sometimes with just 3 cylinders, sometimes with 4. And then there was a day that I've tried to turn it on and I just heard a loud bang and it didn't go anywhere. And that's when it broke the casing for the starter motor. After replacing the starter motor, we noticed, the mechanic and me, that it was producing a whirring noise, the one that I mentioned before, and I think that's because it has to put on a big effort to turn on the engine. And the reason for that effort, I'm going to show you that now. This is still cold, so it will be particularly bad. Beware. Now, I tried to understand where the noise was coming from, and I've read some things, and there are 2 major options to me. One, a slightly bent conrod. It's not impossible, I think that has happened with these engines. Another one I noticed when I did the timing belt and tried to take care of the leak around here, that there was already somewhere to the camshafts, to the lobes. I don't know if that could be related. Also, I did a compression test. I might actually show you that in a future video. I did a compression test in this engine, and one of the cylinders is much slower than the other one. And when you add oil, the figures go up dramatically. So in theory that would point to oil rings. I recently have seen a little bit of smoke, not exactly blue, at the back, so I'm really not sure. I could maybe tear it apart and just take care of that, but this is also due a timing belt. That's also a job that I have to do. And I don't know for how long the head gasket will go. When I replaced the sump, I've noticed that there were some cracks in the oil rail, and that's how they sometimes go, because when they crack, then the bolts cannot maintain the tension that they had. And eventually you have a head gasket that moves ever so slightly. So the easiest path here is to find an healthier engine, and one that is a bit punchier. I hope I can find the right one, because those punchier engines are not as common anymore. I'll just give you a hint. It's still going to be a naturally aspirated K-series. And there will be no variable valve control. That's as far as I'm going. With that out of the way, let's carry on with the rest of the video. Now, what's really worse than before is the engine, which ticks horribly. I wouldn't say tick, I would more say knock. It's very bad, but it's been like this for 3,000 kilometers. Now, in terms of driving, since the shock absorbers are relatively new, the car is very supple, this sort of thing. After all this time, it's still a very pleasant car to drive. There is no play in the steering wheel, although I haven't replaced anything related to the steering. It's a shame that the engine is sounding like this, but because the car is relatively well soundproofed, it doesn't annoy you too much. The gearbox works fine, although sometimes when you change quickly, there's a bit of a knock. It's maybe still one of the engine mounts. And sometimes I can't get fifth in one go. There's some sort of resistance and I have to push it a bit further, which is annoying. Let me close the window. Really silent, this car. Around this sort of road and the city. Let's turn on the air conditioning. The brakes work just fine around here. The issue is just braking from high speeds. There are one or two rattles. This is not the best place to show you them, but one that is annoying me a lot is coming from the seat belt here on the passenger side, on the passenger seat. There's a rattle from the speaker shelf on the back. I've tried to take care of that like 2 years ago. I have sort of failed. There's no noise when the rear parcel shelf is not there, but as soon as there's pressure applied to it, it starts rattling. There is also something inside here and another one in this door card. I really haven't paid much attention to it. You can hear it now. When you give it a bit more gas, it almost sounds like any other K-series. It's still going relatively well, but I think it's lacking torque. It was already lacking torque before this noise popped its ugly head. I don't know if it's related to the engine itself, or if there's some sort of issue with injectors, for example. I'll have to check that in the future. I like this corner because you go up at the same time. That's the noise. It does make sense to drive this car to its full capacity, let's put it that way. But it's a car that you can still throw around a little bit. If you try to push it further, 6 or 7 tenths, it loses its composure, because I mean there's not even an anti-roll bar at the back, so, and the suspension is really soft, but it's still relatively entertaining. Next steps, I want to take this car to Festival of the Unexceptional in July, and I believe that we could make it with